Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Happy Wednesday. We're happy to have everyone join us today. Quickly, before we jump into our content, I'd like to give some instructions on how to access the Spanish interpretation if needed. Cynthia, can you go to the next slide, please? Great. So our options for Spanish interpretation today, if you click the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom window, you should be able to select the language that you would like to hear the webinar in today. If you do select Spanish and you don't want to hear the original audio track of English, you can also click mute original audio to only hear the Spanish. Okay, next slide. Great. Well, hello and welcome again, everyone. Welcome to the CCR-ETA 2110 Recipients Evaluation Webinar Series, which today will be hosted by the Washington State Evaluation Partnership, or WSEP. WSEP is one of two national evaluation centers of the Community Health Workers for COVID Response and Resilient Communities, CCR program. We are a partnership between organizations and individuals that exist to conduct a national evaluation of the program and provide evaluation-related technical assistance and training support to 2109 grantees. Our strategies include the use of participatory and empowerment evaluation, combining scientific rigor with community authenticity, principles of popular education, and advancing the use of common measures chosen through a participatory process led by community health workers. My name is Elizabeth White. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am the evaluation training manager for WSEP and a public health consultant based in Denver, Colorado, the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho people. Next slide. Before we dig in today, I'd like to begin with a digital land acknowledgement. Since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let's take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technology, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous people worldwide. I invite you to join us in acknowledging all this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time today, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. Next slide. Our webinar today will offer space to discuss trauma-informed assessment methods and the care of ourselves and others in the process. This webinar will overview what trauma-informed evaluation means and can look like in practice through the life cycle of an evaluation, from assessment design to findings dissemination. It will also explore the role of potential secondary trauma for community health worker evaluators and ideas for self and collective care. At the end of the webinar, we will have a brief assessment conducted through Zoom polling, so please make sure to complete that at the end so that we might inform future webinars with your feedback. Our objectives for today include that we will describe trauma-informed approach, particularly in assessment methods, explore tips, tools, and resources to utilize a trauma-informed lens on evaluation, identify what secondary trauma means and can look like for CHW evaluators, and brainstorm ideas for self and collective care, engage in a reflective and/or applied practice to examine individual CCR evaluation efforts, and support attendees to take away at least one concrete action to integrate into their CCR evaluation activities. Based on our objectives for today, we'd like to understand a little bit better the level of knowledge everyone here has about trauma-informed evaluation. I'm going to pull up a quick Zoom poll for you to indicate your experience with this topic. So please select the answer that best represents you, and I'll leave the poll up as we go over our next slide. So in order to make the most of our time together today in values-aligned ways, I have a few Zoom and shared space considerations. First, for Zoom, I ask that you please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Please change your name in Zoom to the name you would like to be recognized by. And please put any questions in the chat to be answered by our speakers during the Q&A time. And please know that we are recording the presentation today. Next, for the shared space, I ask that we respect different opinions, experiences, and perspectives, while recognizing that we're ultimately rooted in shared struggle and goals. We aim to lead with curiosity and openness today. I ask for your presence and invite you to treasure the shared time together. And finally, you know your needs best, so please take care of yourself in any ways you see fit. Okay, so I'm going to end our poll really quickly. It looks like we have a 50-50 split between beginner and intermediate level for today. So that's good to know for our speakers. Okay. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker for this first section. Cynthia, you can go ahead and stop sharing the screen here. So Denise Figueroa has over 30 years of professional experience occupying leadership positions in various fields, such as communications, public relations, public affairs, program development, management, grant writing, training, and capacity building in government, private, and not-for-profit scenarios. For the past 16 years, she has worked in the fields of HIV, substance abuse, and mental health. Denise has provided training during COVID-19 on contact tracing and integrated case management services for HRSA Ryan White Part A recipients, including how to follow up on clients using a trauma-informed approach. She currently works with the Ending the HIV Epidemic Initiative in San Juan, Puerto Rico, for which she wrote the competitive proposal. This has included establishing a CHW program incorporated into the continuum of care to increase the retention and care and viral load suppression of those with the highest burden of HIV and challenges to achieve health outcomes. Additionally, Denise has evaluated SAMHSA-funded initiatives to address trauma and substance abuse, including the development of performance measures for quality improvement, the evaluation of EBIs, and provided training and capacity building activities to assist in the cultural exchange of the organization to incorporate a trauma-informed approach into the programs and service delivery systems. She has trained in peer support and motivational interviewing interventions and created material to implement the tools and skills needed in these areas. Denise is a coach and a trainer for performance measure and quality improvement in healthcare. And we are so grateful to have Denise and all of her expertise here today with us. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Denise.
Hi, everybody. I am excited to be part of this initiative. Can you hear me well? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
So we're going to talk a little bit about trauma-informed assessment and how community health workers can adapt and apply this concept or this method into assessment activities and the work you do every day. And we're going to go through different slides, and I'm not going to specifically share all the information in there, but you will have information to go back to and maybe get into their deep in depth, right, in the subject, and to be aware of the time. I'm going to go over the concepts, and if you have any questions, we're going to address those at the end of the presentation. So let's talk a little bit about what trauma-informed means. Let me see if is this working? Okay. We're going to get into trauma-informed approach definitions and key principles to start off with. And it's important for us to understand the concept of trauma, because trauma can affect not only individuals, but communities and groups, and it affects everyone, every race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, background. Trauma is a result of a series of events and circumstances that we can experience, and that could be harmful emotionally, physically, socially, or spiritually. And it's important to be able to identify it and understand it when we're having our interventions with individuals and communities, because this can affect the outcomes of the interventions. And depending on how the individual faces and manages and addresses trauma is how it can affect the work that you will be doing in communities and in your daily work. And trauma lives in and around us. So it's not something that it's independent or to an individual or a group, but we're all exposed to. And what means trauma for one person probably does not mean trauma for another. So when I share these images, you could probably relate and say, oh, okay, the hospital can be my place of work, where I go every day, where I help save lives. And probably a rainy day can mean for you stay cozy inside, share time with family and friends, and maybe hot chocolate or some coffee. But for other people, a hospital may mean a place where they lost a loved one, maybe during the COVID, maybe a traumatic experience. And maybe a rainy day for someone maybe in the Caribbean could mean the loss of a home. So it's important for us to understand trauma and see it in the context, not only of the individuals, but also in the context of community. Because trauma does not occur, like I say, isolated. It occurs in the context of community, whether it's defined by geography, neighborhood, or a specific population. And trauma can be built into norms and passed from generation to generation. Therefore, it's important for us to know our communities, know our clients, and know where they come from, their backgrounds, what affects those communities, how do they understand, how do they incorporate trauma within their daily lives and their communities. And when a community can provide a context of understanding trauma, then this will be very helpful in the process of an individual healing and the community as well. And for us, or you as community health workers or public health workers, it's important to know this and be able to complement and be a facilitator and a resource in this process of healing trauma within individuals and communities. So what does trauma-informed mean? It just means for us to become aware and have knowledge of trauma and how it has impacted individuals and communities and how it continues to impact communities and individuals. Because we want to prevent re-traumatization in our interventions. We want to carry out our work in a way that can be support healing, support resilience, right? And address adequately trauma and not cause distress. So it's important for us to understand what trauma-informed means. When we talk about a trauma-informed approach, we're talking about a way of doing things, a method of doing things, being mindful and considering these traumatic experiences in individuals' lives and communities. And the purpose is to not only understand the trauma, to be effective in the way we ask questions, we carry out assessments, we carry out interviews, but also identify ways that we can be resources in that process of healing and recovery. And trauma-informed approach brings us to ask the question, not what's wrong with you, not being judgmental, not being opinionated about something, but to understand what that person has been through, what has happened, and see ways that we can help address these needs and issues that trauma can provoke in a person or a community. So it's important for us to know the core principles of trauma-informed approach, because these core principles are going to guide you in the process of doing your work, being mindful of trauma and how trauma has affected this individual or community, which is your client. The core principles are 6, and they emphasize physical, psychological, and emotional safety for not only the providers or evaluators, but also those clients that have been through trauma. And the first 3 are safety, trustworthiness and transparency, and peer support. When we talk about safety, it's important that we understand what safety means for those clients. And it's important to understand in the context of trauma what safety means. So if a person has been exposed to COVID and has had a traumatic experience with COVID, probably that person does not want to go out of their homes. So how do we approach referrals? How do we offer services in the context of what is safe for that client? Trustworthiness and transparency leads us to build and maintain trust. And that's very important for you to have a trustworthy relationship with the client, with the person you're trying to help, trying to navigate the system. And peer support, well, it's important to understand that peers, and most of you know this, refers to individuals with lived experience, in this case, lived experiences with trauma. It is a vehicle for establishing that relationship based on safety, hope, trust, and it does help enhance collaboration. And this, particularly for me, is very important. And you guys, as community health workers that are probably part of the same communities you serve, is so important because it will make you more effective and more efficient in the interventions you carry out. The other three core principles are collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historical, gender issues. When we talk about collaboration, it's the importance of partnering and leveling power. We want to make our clients feel that we are equals, that they can share decision making with us in the process of establishing maybe their action plans and the course of action we want to take in their treatment, or in the case of you, the referrals and the follow-up, and how they want things to unfold. Empowerment, voice, and choice is the recognizing the individual strengths and the experiences, support them in that decision making, and be facilitators. And we don't want to control the process. We want them to work with us and collaborate. And cultural and historical gender issues it just takes us to move past our stereotypes, move past biases, and support our clients in a way that is objective and it's culturally competent, right? And that's super important for us to be effective in our work and interventions. So when we talk about community health workers, we're talking about these public health workers, frontline workers that are trusted in the communities. And you've been deployed into communities that have been most affected by chronic diseases, COVID. It could be HIV, it could be other types of diseases, right? And you provide education and support and empowerment. And the objective is what? To increase the access to health and social services that they need to move towards health equity. So it's important for you to understand, and for us all that work in the public health field in some way, directly or indirectly, to apply these principles and to better connect with our community members and our clients and establish that relationship of trust so we could have better outcomes at the end. And you will be evaluating your work and you will be carrying on assessments. And this is going to be instrumental in the way you approach the people and the communities throughout your interventions. I'm going to share with you strategies that are based in those core principles that you could use when you're conducting interventions in the context of a trauma-informed approach. First of all, seek training and gain the knowledge and skills. I see that half of the group has a basic or a beginner's knowledge level, and half of you have some knowledge and have intermediate level. But it's important ongoing to seek training. We will always face different challenges. We will always need to update that information. And as we move and work in different communities and approach different needs, it's important for us to stay updated in this subject. Also, know your clients. Listen to their stories. If you understand what has happened to them, you could be more effective in communicating, gaining their trust, and gathering that information in terms of their unmet needs and being able to work towards that. Establish rapport, show empathy, show that you can relate to the situation, especially when you are a peer in their community or you have experienced trauma. You can show them that you can relate and that you understand where they're coming from. It's important to build relationships based on trust. We have to show up and follow up and be true to our word. That's very important, because if you work hard to establish a relationship and then you do not show up and you not follow up on your promises or the request of the client, then we will just go back to square one, right? So it's important to follow up and be true to what we promised or what we set out to do for the client. Treat your client as an equal. It's important to share the power of decision making throughout the process of an intervention, of an assessment. It's important for them to feel that they have certain level of control, especially because trauma takes away control and it brings fear and instability. So it's important for us to be also facilitators in that process. And I would say give the client a say, right, on the terms and content of the interventions we're carrying out. Also, practice cultural competency is very important to know are the differences in the cultural beliefs and values and be able to respect them and acknowledge them so we could communicate appropriately. Let's dive in a little bit into what trauma-informed approach and assessment methods is. And we're going to start by defining what trauma-informed evaluation is. Trauma-informed evaluation is a framework grounded in an understanding of and responsiveness to the impact of trauma. And that can be used in data collection activities to ensure that all these sensible topics are addressed appropriately and with care. And this framework takes into consideration trauma and the traumatic effects because it's trauma informed, right? And it minimizes the risk of re-traumatization. And that's something that we want to avoid. There are different types of evaluations, and I'm not going to address them all, but we have formative evaluation, process and implementation, outcomes effectiveness, and impact and evaluation. But we most commonly use process and outcomes evaluation in our daily action plans, right? And we carry out activities of monitoring and evaluation throughout the processes of implementation and also at the end of any project. And as you finish a project year, you look into how things were carried out, were they carried out successfully, but also how did that impact the client that you're addressing. So it's important for us to be knowledgeable those terms and those resources and those methods that we have are at our disposition to evaluate the outcomes and the progress of what we do. When we talk about trauma-informed assessment methods, and we're talking about methods that we use in the process of gathering data, and it's important for us to apply these core principles of trauma-informed approach into that. And you could use surveys and focus groups and interviews and observations and progress tracking to do that. And there are different delivery systems that we could use. Now with COVID, the technology is a big tool to be able to navigate and to, I would say, reduce the gaps of and link clients to service, especially when safety is an issue. And you guys, all of us experienced that through COVID. So it's important to see that we have different options to be more effective in the process of gathering data throughout the different methods. So which data collection method is more appropriate for the work we're gonna do? Well, it depends. It depends what are you looking for, what are the questions we need answers for, right? And it depends also in the time, in the target population, and in various factors. So let's look at some of these. We have self-administered surveys, and they are surveys that allows the participant the most privacy because the individual responds the questions in at their own pace and in the comfort probably of their home, in a computer, or maybe it could be a hard copy in an office, but they control totally what they do or do not answer. But this method is less useful when you're looking for open-ended information, when you're looking for qualitative information. It gives you little opportunity for that detail. Then we have the focus groups. They're facilitated discussions, that they are group conversations. This is great for open-ended questions to get that qualitative information we're looking for. But when we're talking about trauma and it being so sensible, for some individuals to approach, especially if we have not identified as a victim of trauma, this would not be recommended as a method to gather data. The interviews, on the other hand, I would say is the method that would be more appropriate when we're addressing trauma. Because the interviewers can monitor and address feelings, distress, see those signs and signals throughout the process, and be able to pause and address if it is needed. So I would say the interviews in this case would be one of the most effective methods. And interviews can be carried out through the phone or in person. There's different ways through Zoom. So now we have various options. When we talk about trauma-informed interviewing, it's important for us to see that we have to understand that we have to be intentional in our questions. It doesn't mean we're avoiding addressing questions that may be difficult for the client, but it's important for us to be able to understand how we're going to ask these sensitive questions, especially if they're emotionally charged and are associated to the trauma the individual or community has experienced. So it's important for us as interviewers not to show our own discomfort or feelings, especially because we also live with trauma and maybe we relate so much to the situation that we can be affected. And in the second part of this training, you're going to be listening to a great group of people talking about this and giving you tools and tricks of how to manage that and self-care. Also, we have to be compassionate and try not to interrupt during the response, because when somebody opens up to you to answer a question and really the information starts flowing, it's important to listen and not interrupt, and tolerate pauses, even long ones. Sometimes we're not ready to disclose all the information, and the client might need a moment. So it's important for us as interviewers to consider that. So how do we ask sensitive questions? We have to be transparent. And an example would be, I am asking these questions to help understand from your experience, right? And it could be different with every community, with every group, but it's important to be clear about what our objectives are and reaffirm trust, not be judgmental, and give that client the space to say, if it's something you cannot address right now, we could probably get back to that, right? So an example could be, when I ask these questions, it's not because I don't believe you, especially if you're going back to kind of validate information. And sometimes in assessments, we need to validate information, right? So it's important for the person not to feel that you're being repetitive or you're asking again because you didn't really believe him or didn't understand. It's important for us then to be clear that if we're required to validate, then let the person know. And if they don't remember at the moment, it's okay. And you could come back later to me with the information if you do remember. We also have to take a storytelling approach to make it easier, so the flow would be natural, organic, right? And an example would be, you told me about a time that, and I'm going to ask you a few questions about that. Do you remember if? Tell me a little bit about your experience that day. It seems like it is hard to remember and talk about. Thank you for sharing with me. Do you remember anything else that you wish to add? And this would help you get to the information you need without it feeling so structured and so, I would say, unpersonal. Also, in the process of assessing and collecting data, we are going to sometimes need to perform follow-up questions. And interviewing is a process where there's work between sessions. So it's important for you to identify in the process if there's any conflicting information, if there's any vague or confusing responses, and go back to the client and try to approach it without the client feeling that you're being judgmental about it or that you are questioning. So here I share some examples. You could say, can we go back for a minute to that question about whatever it is you're talking about, right? And you explain that, and I see that you responded in the last question that did I understand correctly? I want to make sure that I'm accurately capturing your experience and documenting correctly your responses. Or you could say, can you please elaborate a little bit more on this? I want to make sure I fully understand your experience and how did that make you feel? So it's a way of approaching, going back to questions and validating information without being, I would say, or making the client feel that we're not getting them or we're not attentive to what they're speaking. Also, no cues or signals of disclosed information. Maybe somebody's not prepared at the moment. So we could say something like, I understand that some questions may be difficult and you have the choice of not responding. Here's where you share the power of decision, right? I am asking this question because I believe it's important. So you could, so I could understand your experience and things like that. You could use as a way of getting to the point where you want that person to open up and you get your information and make them clear that your priority is for the client to feel comfortable and let them know that you can wait for them to be ready. So what to do if you identify distress? Ask the client if they need to take a break. Pause for a moment if needed and ask the client, is there anything you can do to make them feel more comfortable? If the distress persists, then ask the client if they wish to reschedule. And that's an option, right? We have to give them that option if we see that it's too hard for them to continue. We also need to ask the client if they wish to talk to somebody, if there is somebody that they wish you to contact, and offer to coordinate a referral or immediate counseling if the person, consents of that. And it's important to stay with the client until you sense the level of distress has decreased and the person has received the appropriate interventions. Sometimes we need to have these resources at hand so we could call. And it's important for us to go back to our teams and say, hey, how are we going to prepare for this type of situation if it comes up? Especially if the interviewers are not the community health workers. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later. So at the end of the interview, when you want to wrap up the interview, it's important for you to talk to your client about the next steps and if there will be follow-up, right? Maybe it's the last one, we'll let them know it's the last intervention and share your contact information to remind them that they can get back to you, call, or if they remember something they wish to add, give them the option, right? Recognize and validate the effort that they've put into participating and sharing the information. So some considerations, I want to share some considerations when we're planning and developing an assessment tool for data collection. Maybe you're not involved in the process, but it's important for us to know the correct process of approaching, and especially in a trauma-informed way when we're developing a tool to collect data. In this case, when we have to obviously identify what is the most appropriate method to collect the data, right? Considering those factors that may influence the process and outcomes. Consider and classify those questions that you need answers for. What type of questions do we need to ask? Are they sensitive, emotionally charged? Are they not emotionally charged? Develop a draft of the instrument. And it's important if the person that's drafting the instrument is not the community health worker, we share this instrument with the community health workers, with data collection staff and other colleagues that could look into it and provide feedback. We want to validate the instrument with peers or members of the target population to ensure the perspective of the persons with shared experience is included. And this would help us minimize the risk of triggering trauma. Some recommendations for interviewers. Practice the interview script. It's important to be familiar with what you're asking. Make sure you have that list of resources available for immediate referrals when needed. And like I said before, if you're not the CHW assigned, then consider inviting them to be available. Be empathetic, be patient, regulate internal emotions, use active listening skills. This is super important. Build rapport and maintain neutrality and lack of judgment. And that's not only verbally, but also non-verbally. And we need to prepare to minimize the stress. And we talked about, throughout the presentation, how we need to consider the location, the situation, the environmental factors that might remind a person of some aspects of trauma. Be attentive of those signs and signals of possible distress. And it's important to ask prior to the intervention for the client's consent and explain the interview process. And also to be truthful about the process. Let them know about the time we need for this intervention, and all the terms and conditions, if there's any that apply. And also avoid language that can trigger trauma. And that's something that we have to be mindful of, because some traumatic triggers can come up without you even noticing. So it's important to know that a traumatic trigger is something that can remind a person of trauma. It could be a smell, expression, a word, a phrase, and it can manifest as maybe becoming ill, feeling discomfort, being angry or defensive throughout the process of your intervention. So it's important to be aware of those signs and signals. So towards the end, close toward the end, let's talk about a little bit of reporting. We all have requirements of reporting, right? Reporting requirements. So it's important to disclose to the participant that this is a reporting requirement, and let them understand this is the process of our work, and maybe get them to open up and be willing to participate. And we need to ensure confidentiality. Something very important is use respondents' own words when documenting answers, and because we want to be accurate about what we gathered. Confidentiality and privacy, we all know this is something that's super important. We have to ensure that to our respondents. We have to obtain consent and ensure that participation is voluntary. This is super important. In conclusion, and I'm going a little fast, and I apologize for that, but we have a great second part of this webinar, and I want you to be able to participate fully. It's important for us to remind ourselves that being trauma-informed means that we realize the impact of trauma, that we recognize signs and signals, that we can respond and address and carry out interventions knowing about trauma and how is impacting or has impacted an individual, with the objectives of preventing. We want to do things in a way that prevents people to re-traumatize and create distress. Also, it's important to apply the key principles of trauma-informed approach to better connect with our communities, be more effective in the work we do. And it's important to self-assess. And it's in the second part, you guys are going to listen about this, and they have great tools and techniques you could use, but it's important to be safe, not only ensure the safety of the participant, but also your own safety, and be mindful that well-being is not only for those we serve, but also for us as interviewers and as providers and practitioners. So with this said, we want to see if anybody has questions, and I think that I'm going to have some of the teams help out with the chat. I appreciate everybody joining today, and I hope that this information shared is helpful and you could take something back and apply to your practices every day. So Elizabeth, are we gonna, let me see.
Yes, thank you so much, Denise. Great. I do see a question in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read it out to you. Thank you for this presentation. Are there certain words that generally may trigger trauma responses that we should not use in the broadest sense? I know it also depends on someone's experience, but was just curious if there are some standard language.
Well, there's a lot of recommendations that you could that I could give right now, but like you said, it depends on the situation. I would say avoid negative terms, or avoid maybe terms that can be, I would say, that's a hard one. I'm trying to find an example right now. Well, if you're working with a community in COVID, for example, probably the word death, or probably the word wow, it's hard to me give you an answer right now, but I would say that try to approach in a positive way. Try not to use words that are directly associated to the situation. If it's if a person lost a person in COVID, well, try to use words that are indirectly, I would say, approaching the term. And I would want to give you examples right now, but it just depends on the situation. We could probably search for some resources and have them emailed prior after the presentation. And yeah, I could definitely get you, Elizabeth, maybe some resources for that. But I would say just be mindful of what the trauma is most present in that person at the time of the interview, and then try to work around it. But I would say nothing that would be judgmental or negative in that sense, or negatively charged words. So yeah, we could definitely look into that a little more.
Thank you, Denise. I think that's so true, doing the homework ahead of time to understand some of the past and histories and context for folks is really important to inform the answer to that question.
Yes.
I do have one resource I can share that I do have off the top of my head, if that's okay. There is an evaluator, and her name is Elizabeth Grimm, and she's done a series on adopting inclusive and nonviolent language. And she does a really great job at outlining some alternatives to common language that we use that could potentially be triggering in the nonviolent space. So I put that link in the chat as a resource for folks right now.
Yes, there's a lot in violence in that, and yes, and it has to do with domestic violence and all that. So I think that we could apply always those principles to any situation.
Great. Thank you so much, Denise. It looks like that's our only question in the chat.
Okay.
I'll invite others as we continue on with the webinar today. If you have any questions that pop into your head of like, oh, I definitely want to ask Denise that, please feel free to use the chat. And if we have time at the end, we'll come back to them. And if not, we'll definitely follow up with you later.
Of course.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Denise. That was really inspiring and important, all the context that you offered to us today. So thank you so much for your expertise.
My pleasure. And I will tag along and
Great.
join you for the rest of the presentation. Thank you all. Thank you.
Great. Well, Denise's content gives us a really great context to set the stage for our next speakers. And so I have two amazing, brilliant people to introduce you to now. I'd like to introduce you to Penny Jewell and Victoria Adewumi. Penny Jewell is a certified CHW through Michigan Community Health Worker Alliance and has an associate degree in human services. Penny has over 30 years of experience in community health, providing advocacy, care coordination, direct care, health education, social support, capacity building, and case management. In 2020, recognizing the lack of resources in the surrounding community, Penny founded Athens Home Care Solutions to provide non-medical home care services. She is currently developing strategies to integrate community health workers into those services. Penny is also a member of the leadership team of the National CHW Center for Research and Evaluation Project, which contributes to the integrity, sustainability, viability of CHW programs through the identification of common process and outcome indicators for CHW practice. Welcome, Penny. We also have Victoria Adewumi. Victoria is an equity communicator and a network leader supporting neighborhood-based interventions for community health and well-being. Victoria works as the community liaison for the City of Manchester Health Department. As part of the first class of trained community health workers in the state of New Hampshire, Victoria works to link Manchester residents with greater social, physical, and environmental supports to facilitate resident self-empowerment. She currently serves on the board of the Organization for Refugee and Immigrant Success and the New Hampshire Health and Equity Partnership. A New Hampshire native, Victoria holds a BA, MA in Political Science and International Affairs from the University of New Hampshire. Victoria is a member of the 2020 class of the Bloomberg Fellows Program and a current MPH candidate in the focus area of adolescent health at Johns Hopkins University. So it is my pleasure to pass it over to the brilliant Penny and Victoria for our next section of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. We are ecstatic to be here, to be with all of you, and just want to give another huge round of applause to Denise. That was an incredible presentation. And so we really see our job as helping to solidify some of what you just heard, and also how can we start building and internalizing within our own professional and personal practice, how we ourselves support ourselves and each other through trauma. So myself and Penny are big proponents of something called popular or people's education. And all that means is that we are here to learn from you as much as we might bring things of value or utility to you. We also really hope that we are facilitating a conversation and that you all have agency to sort of direct your own learning, and that we are going to have a powerful conversation together. So let's get started. To that end, if I can get the next slide, please. We are going to begin with 2 definitions and then a brainstorm. So our first definition, as we think about secondary trauma, you're seeing on your screen. And so I'll give you just a moment to read that. And then in addition to this definition, we'd love to present a second definition related around vicarious trauma. So if we can get the next slide, please. So with these 2 definitions, we are going to have a brainstorm, but we're going to leave these definitions up for your reference. We're really curious to hear from you as you start to think about these 2 definitions, the ways they're similar, the ways they're different. What strikes you? What's resonating with you? What has caught your attention in terms of similarities or differences with these 2 definitions? So please raise your hand and we will ask one of our incredible facilitation team members to call on you, or utilize the chat to help us think about how are these definitions similar, different, and what's resonating with you. So I have Meredith in the chat thinking about secondary trauma is really that exhaustion around helping people, and vicarious trauma being more related to apathy because of what you're experiencing in terms of you being a helper or in a helper profession. We also have Georgia in the chat really thinking about vicarious trauma specifically, that the definition sounds a little bit more intense, sort of the shift, even though they both might come from similar situations. These are great, great reflections. We'd love a few more other things that you're either seeing, noticing, strike you, or resonate with you as you're looking at these 2 definitions. We have Raven in the chat also saying the change in fundamental beliefs being altered really resonates in the vicarious trauma definition. I think I'd agree with that as well. And I'd love, as we continue the conversation, and again, please continue utilizing the chat. Please also feel free to unmute yourself and raise your hand. We'd love to hear your voice as we are going through this presentation. And we have Karina in the chat thinking about that secondary trauma as really symptom focused, whereas the vicarious trauma is that change in the entire system and worldview. And I could not agree more, and keep it going in the chat. We are definitely not done having this conversation, but really I'd love to present sort of these examples for you all. This idea that you are a helper who cares about people, who wants to support others, and really that is being challenged potentially by what you're experiencing. And so folks who might be individuals who work and help within domestic violence, feeling like all of a sudden there is no such thing as a healthy relationship. or somebody who is working specifically around supporting young people who are experiencing violence or abuse, being maybe hypersensitive around trusting other people with their own child. And so both are pervasive, both are extraordinarily challenging. And I think whether we realize it or not, we may be more susceptible to both than we might realize, right? That we might not just be showing outward symptoms of some of the trauma that we might be experiencing as helpers, as community health workers, as others in helping professions, or those who care about and support the helpers, but that at the same time, there are really active steps we need to take to ensure that we are not just helping others, but really ensuring that ourselves are helped as well. So next slide, please. And we're going to be moving in just a moment to how we can start thinking about this for ourselves. So I would love to send things over to Penny, who's going to lead us in a reflective activity.
Thank you. Thanks, Victoria. So we heard a lot from Denise about how we need to use this trauma-informed lens when we're, evaluating, when we're working with our clients. And so as we do that as community health workers, then we're experiencing, the secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, right? And so we need to take some time to think about how these things affect us in our lives, in our experiences. And so what we want to take is a little time to just to sit and reflect on that. So I know a lot of people have journaled in your lifetime, and I would love to see a show of hands, actually. How many people have spent some time in their life journaling? You don't have to, on a regular basis, on a, yeah, thank you. Thank you for those hands, right? So, journaling it's a great way to just, improve your mental and emotional well-being, right? It helps you to just take some time to process, whether they're negative thoughts or positive thoughts, but just processing those feelings, your thoughts and experiences. So what we're going to do right now is just, if you can find a piece of paper and a pen, and if you have to do it on your computer, that's okay too, I guess, but I just love the paper and pen, just there's something really special about taking that time to write it out physically. And we want to take some time and think about, how do these kind of traumas, how do they show up in your experience as a helper, as a community health worker, evaluator, as your experience as a program manager, whatever it is. But we want to talk about how community health workers, as the helpers, are really put in these positions to have to, not only, are we working with these clients, these patients, working with them through some really traumatic experiences, but this is, how it comes back and it affects us personally. So just take a few minutes. We're gonna play some music, and we want you to look at these two questions, well, three actually, but think about how they show up. You can use as much detail or as little as you want, and then we're going to talk about some ways that you cope with it, some healthy ways you might want to share with the rest of the group, and yeah, just other ideas. So we're going to take a minute, we're going to just put on some music, and we're going to take about 5 minutes. So everybody just go ahead and take some time. There you go.
90 seconds for folks, just about 90 seconds to complete your journaling.
All right, I think we're going to come back together. I hope you all enjoyed that music and that just soothing 5 minutes of relaxation. Right. So now what we'd really like to do is take another opportunity to take about 5 more minutes. And we're going to go into these breakout groups where it's just going to be you and one other person. And want to invite you to just discuss these topics with another person, just to be brave, right? And just share as little or as much as you want, but not only is this good for us, personally to take the time, but we can share, some of these ways that we cope, share these with another person. And it might really be something that, they hadn't thought about and could really be beneficial to them. So as we go into these, and then also just, we don't need the reminder, but that anything we share in here is going to stay between us and that one other person. It's completely confidential. We have that trust in one another that we can share these things. So if I think it's Elizabeth going to set us up into breakout rooms. And I would also invite you to take, they won't be recorded. And I would also invite you to, if you can, come off of, or come on to the video and share just a few minutes with another person in our group today. So Elizabeth, I'm going to let you do your thing.
Thank you, Penny. And just one quick reminder, if you are in the Spanish interpretation room, please don't join the breakout room if you're invited to. Please stay in the main room so that you can keep the translation services. Okay, I'll start those now.
All right, welcome back. So before I pass you over to Victoria, I just want to take a minute and ask if anybody would want to share, not anything personal, just how, a coping mechanism or healthy ways that you do cope when these things come up in your life. And you're welcome to put them in the chat, come off the mute if you'd like to. Going for walks, yes. That nature walk for me, that's huge to just reconnect. A friend of mine used to take her shoes off and stand in the dirt and just ground herself. And I'd never thought of that, but yeah, and +1 for nature, yeah. Journaling sometimes is hard for me. I don't always make the time. Others have good tips for us and how you deal with this secondary or vicarious trauma that you come across in your work. Yeah, audiobooks, reading is great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass you over to Victoria. And you can keep adding those in the chat as you desire. But go ahead, Victoria. I'm going to have them pull up the next slide for you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Penny. And I don't know the last time you got 5 minutes in your day just to sort of do some self-reflection and also connect with another person about how you can be best supported, especially during the workday. So I myself am greatly appreciating the time we've had so far. So in our last 15 or so minutes, we're really going to be digging a little bit deeper into the idea of both self and community care. And I am giving lots of flowers to the brilliant and fabulous Elizabeth White for really helping us think through how these concepts are related, but how they're a little bit different as well. So when we think about self-care, and I don't have to tell anybody on this call what self-care is, but I will say in terms of the language we like to use, that we think about it as sort of a radical act of self-compassion. Now, there are many evidence-informed strategies related to self-care that have been shown to improve mood and support overall health. Walking in nature is one of them. You may or may not know this, but depression actually correlates with a disconnection to nature. So your walk in the woods is not just helping you feel better, it actually is lowering, in some studies, your likelihood of experiencing those symptoms. So there's that side of self-care. And unfortunately, I think we all know there is another side of self-care that is sort of a billion-dollar wellness industry that advocates everything from bubble baths to green juices, which is not necessarily harmful at all. Both of those things are fantastic. And also, we know that real, true self-care does not happen in isolation. It's not individualistic, it's not capitalistic, but it really is a thriving inner and outer experience. It's community connections and systems that support wellness and not trauma. So we can't practice self-care in systems that are engineered to create trauma and traumatic experiences. And we also know that as community health workers, community health worker allies, that support, community support is required to function optimally and sustainably. And again, just like we wouldn't ask someone to get over high blood pressure on their own, we shouldn't ask folks to overcome trauma on their own either. So we want to think about these concepts a little bit more and also uplift how what works for myself or what works for Penny might be very different than what works for you. So if we could go to our next slide, please. We're going to take a moment to really think about both of these things, self-care and community care. And I'd love to hear for you all what barriers and facilitators might exist for you practicing one or the other or both. What makes it easier? What might make it harder? And quite frankly, most importantly, what is really resonating with you personally as an individual on this list? What item or items from either category, from both categories, do you think you might want to spend a little more time with this week and potentially incorporate in your personal or professional practice? So again, please use the chat, or again, we'd love to hear your voice. So feel free to come off mute, raise your hand. We'd love to call on you. And as folks are thinking, I'd also love to just lift up in the chat that we have Denise, that reminding herself of why she's here in this moment, and the objective is really helpful for grounding and really feeling like, you know, the ability to overcome trauma, vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. Also from Terry, we have doing preventative work with wonderful people, both colleagues and community. We have from Chris in the chat that movement is so vital for Chris's maybe personal or professional care practice. I would agree with that. And I'm curious to hear from others. What kinds of things are you seeing on this list or not on this list entirely that you might want to either lift up, comment about how beneficial it's been for you, or think about how you might want to incorporate it moving forward? And again, feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself, raise your hand. We'd love to call on you. I would love to repeat the question, Alyssa. So we're asking, what on these lists is resonating with you? Either self-care list, community care list, or both? Is there something that is really grabbing your attention at this moment? And the other thing I'm hoping that we can think about is what kinds of things make it easier or harder to practice some of these things? So for example, cooking a meal for someone is an amazing community care practice, and some of us might feel sort of a time austerity, not enough time to be able to do that or be able to practice that in ways they might like to. Connecting with nature is amazing. And also, if you're in a urban environment that maybe accessing nature is a little bit more challenging, that's sort of an additional step versus myself that lives in a relatively suburban environment. So would love to hear your thoughts about what kinds of things or the conversation we'd like to have about what things on these lists are resonating with us, and also what might make certain things easier or some things harder. And Alicia, thank you so much for your addition. Mindfulness and listening to music, absolutely. Huge, huge opportunities for self-care. Are there any things on the community care list that folks might say, oh, I'm either doing this or I might like to take a step and maybe incorporate that a little bit more? Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat, checking on a friend, absolutely. Celebrating gains, celebrating wins, absolutely. So again, we are lifting up both of these lists to you all as sort of ideas, and again, things that we know are evidence-based ways to help us overcome, or at least maybe cope with a little bit more optimally secondary and vicarious trauma, and at the same time, what kinds of ways can we think about our own care practices, not disconnected from each other, but really connected, right? As community health workers and allies, that even that community piece is so vital for our overall health, which we already know that social connectedness is so vital and indicative of how we're able to not just support ourselves, but our families and our communities. So with that, I'll move us to our final portion of our time together. We have just about a little under 10 minutes, and I'd love Penny to sort of take us home with our final section.
Thank you. Thanks, Victoria. So we really want to just thank you for your participation today, for taking the time to come and learn about how we can provide trauma-informed care in our evaluations, and then how to take care of ourselves, right? And how, as community health workers, we need to really it's not selfish to take that time and take all those self-care moments that you need. But what we really want to do right now is use this last self-care strategy to help us just reframe our thoughts around all the really, truly wonderful things in our lives. And we all can find one thing every day, right, to be grateful for. And that is actually one of the things that I try to do when I journal. And so in the chat, come off mute, show us your beautiful face. Just take a minute and think of one thing that you're truly grateful for today. I'm going to read a few out. I always will share that I am always grateful for I have sweet little grandchildren now, 3 little granddaughters, and, you know, oh, Terry's going to come. No, I thought I was seeing Terry come on to share.
I also want you to share something that you're grateful for. It's you, Cynthia. We're in a room together. Hi, everyone. I'm just grateful that we're able to hold space for these important conversations in general. And I'm glad that we have each other to talk about these things.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, having the space is very important. And having good friends to share, right? Alicia says, being in good health, no aches or pains in your body. That's amazing. Elizabeth's grateful for the autumn colors in Denver this week. Thank you. Right, I think there's a saying somewhere that says you can always find something to be grateful for. Even in kind of our most trying moments, we can find something to be grateful for. So again, thank you. Go ahead and feel free to keep putting those in the chat for the last minute or two here. We also want to share some resources with you. You'll see those on the screen. I'm wondering if we can also put those in the chat, Elizabeth. There are some great tools from the University of Michigan. Yeah, there we go. There's School of Social Work. Alexandra, right? Grateful for not having any hurricanes hit the island. Yeah, I cannot even imagine how stressful that is for you there. So yes, thank you. And I think I'm going to pass you back to Elizabeth. Again, we really appreciate the invitation, Elizabeth. Oh, okay. Thank you, Terry.
Great. Thank you so much. I know I'm feeling very grounded by our gratitude practice, our reflections, our music. So thank you so much for offering that space for us today. Again, huge thank you to all of our speakers, Penny, Victoria, Denise. This was a fantastic webinar, and I learned a lot from all of you. So thank you for spending your time with us today. Before we go, I have 2 things I just want to share quickly. If we can go to the next slide. I first am going to ask for, I guess the next few slides. Thank you, Cynthia. I'm first going to ask for some feedback for those of you who are left in the webinar today. I'm going to launch the feedback poll here. I'll go ahead and leave this up as I share with you about a few upcoming opportunities for more learning. So we have 2 upcoming webinars. One is actually tomorrow from our friends at Envision. It is on CHW allyship, and I can go ahead and put the link for registration in the chat here. We also have ASU, who is doing the next webinar in this evaluation training series. Will be hosting a webinar about using photo voice in evaluation that is coming up on November 8th. And more details are coming soon, but save the date for that one. The registration link can be found in the chat. Okay, well, that's all we have for you today. I just want to thank everyone for spending their time with us today and for your participation. We're really grateful to share this space with you, and we look forward to our next opportunity to do so. We will also share this recording by AMP in the coming days, so please feel free to revisit it and share it with others. But thank you. Have a great day.